Hello, my name is Jarrett Brown. I live in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Today, my North Carolina mountain memories. I'm originally from North Carolina. I was born in Charlotte. I lived in the outskirts of Charlotte until I was about 5, and then after that, I lived in Indian Trail, which is a suburb of Charlotte. Later on, I lived in different parts of North Carolina. But the North Carolina mountains are a place that has always been very special to me. I have photos of when I was a baby in the mountains. My mother holding me at Linville Falls, sort of near Linville, Marion. And then, when I was a kid, my first memories probably going up there when I was around 5 or 6 years old to my grandfather's cabin. My grandfather, he had a tile business. He was a tile installer, and he started in the 1950s. He learned from his brother-in-law, who started earlier than that, in the early 1950s or before. But anyway, my grandfather was a tile installer, and he started to do very well in business. He stayed busy, and he installed a lot of tile, and he made good money. And then when my dad joined him in the business, and my uncle joined him in the business, and they really helped him make a lot of money. My dad and my uncle did. So my grandfather, he started doing much better. And then in the 70s and early 80s, my grandfather, he got distracted by his hobbies. He had a lot of hobbies. He liked to restore cars. He liked to ride horses. He liked to fly airplanes. He liked to develop real estate. He did a lot of things. He liked to just shop. He would go to flea markets and just buy shit, buy things. But he decided to build this cabin in the 80s, and he found what he later told me was the most beautiful place that he'd ever seen, and I believe it. Other than he had been on the West Coast, so he kind of in the San Francisco area, Alameda, California, so he had seen some beautiful places. But he said that was the most beautiful place he had ever seen, and he bought 2 lots. He bought one that was 7 acres, and it had the cabin that he built, and then he had another lot across the way a few miles, and it was also 7 acres, but he didn't ever build a cabin on that one. But so he built this cabin. It's towards the top of a mountain, kind of along a ridge. You kind of come up to it, and then you turn, and you're on a ridge. And the cabin was, depending on how you look at it, 3 stories, or 2. But there's a main floor that you come into. They used to call that the basement, but it was where the front door was, so I don't know how that's a basement. But you come in there, and there was these tile floors that I still like. Still wish I had. I think there's kind of tiles called terracotta. It's these brown tiles that were kind of like Mexican tiles that you might see in a Mexican restaurant or something. There were these big brown 12 by 12 maybe tiles, and there was a pool table in there. There was a bar area in there. We thought that was great when we were kids. Me and my brother and sisters thought that was funny because my mom and dad didn't like alcohol. And then there was a utility room that had a, I don't know what you call it, but it's like this box that has a lever on top, and you use it to ignite dynamite. And my grandfather always told us that he used that to dynamite the rocks where he built the cabin. I don't know if that's true, but it could be. But that little utility room, it had a lot of spiders and spider webs and all kind of stuff, so we didn't go in there very much, but it had a bunch of random tools and stuff that he had. And but he had this basement. It was a really cool place to hang out. It had a fireplace in it. And I remember when we used to go stay at the cabin, a lot of times at night there wasn't much to do because it's too dark to go outside, and we didn't just want to just sit around all the time. So we would go downstairs, and the whole family would play pool. Me, my brother, my sister, and my mom and dad, and all of us enjoyed it. My sister was younger, but she still did her best, you know. And we had fun games. All of us played and had fun. So, but if you go up from the basement, you walk up these stairs. You go up a few stairs, and then you have to take a left and walk the rest of the way. You walk into the kitchen area, and there was a round table with chairs where we would eat dinner. There was a sliding glass door that led to the side of the cabin, because it was kind of built along a hill, built into a hill, and so you could walk up the side of the house to get from the basement to the kitchen. But anyway, so the kitchen had that same kind of floor that was downstairs. The tile, the terracotta tile, was all throughout the house. Not all throughout the house, but it was in a large majority of the house. And the thing I liked about the kitchen is it had a pot-belly stove, a wood stove, that we never used it, but I just liked the way it looked. And it also had a regular stove and oven and all that. So we used that one, I think, a lot more. But you could tell that a person who installed tile bought the cabin, because like the countertops were made of tile. And I'll tell you about the bathroom. There's some tile in there too, or was. But the kitchen was a nice place to hang out, and plenty of room. We didn't do a whole lot of cooking there, but we would a lot of times bring our food and either keep it in a cooler or put it in the refrigerator that we had there. But we would eat like donuts, those Sweet 16 donuts, those sugary ones. We would eat those a lot for breakfast. And then during the day and at night, a lot of times we would go eat somewhere. Sometimes my mom made sandwiches or something, but I don't remember a whole lot of cooking there. But beside the kitchen was a fireplace that was in the middle of the house, and the fireplace was made of stone, and they actually got a lot of work out of the fireplace because the cabin didn't have heat and it didn't have air. So in the winter it would get really cold, really bad cold, and we had to put antifreeze in the pipes to make sure they wouldn't freeze. The water in the pipes wouldn't freeze during the wintertime. And sometimes it got so cold there that the tile would break in the bathroom upstairs. But there was this living room, and the living room had carpet. It was surrounded by that brown tile that I mentioned, but it had carpet in it, and there was a rocking chair. There was a regular sitting chair, like not a recliner, but that type of chair. And then there was a couch, and they had a what do you call this thing? Coffee table. There were some like ottomans, those things you put your feet up on. Um, but it was a very open space. And the best part about it is that there were lots of windows. So you could look out the windows and see the mountains, and see all the trees and see everything. And in this part of the living room, there was no floor above it. It was just open space. So what could have been the second floor was just open air. So it was there were these great big windows, 2 stories high. So you got the feel of being outside even though you're inside. And the front windows and the front sliding glass door gave it even more effect. You were able to look out onto the porch. We had a deck out there that wrapped around most of the house, and so you could see outside. Open the sliding glass door and let the air in. And listen to the sound of the trees and the owls and everything. So we liked that. And then beside one thing I should mention, there was a wall 2 stories high, because remember the living room didn't have a floor above it, and there was a great big bear rug that my grandfather attached to the wall, and it kind of gave the whole room a outdoors mountain feel, because that's where we were in the mountains. And under that bear there was this, I don't know what you call it, some sort of drawers, this piece of furniture that had drawers in it, and it had a marble top on it. But inside these drawers, my grandfather used to keep his magazines, and he had some motorcycle magazines, and truck magazines, but he also had nude magazines, and we found those, me and my brother did, and at an early age, and we didn't spend a whole lot of time with them, but because my dad found out that we were looking at them, but we flipped through them pretty quick and got an education. That may have been the first time I ever saw a female without clothes. But I remember just seeing them and seeing the magazines and just thinking it was amazing that you could see that kind of stuff, because that's not something that we would ever have imagined seeing in our house, because my mom was a very Christian person who didn't like anything appropriate. No smoking, no drinking, no sex, no nothing, no fun. So we saw that. And but beside the living room was a bedroom. And that's the bedroom that I always stayed in. I think usually my brother, he would sleep on the couch, and my sister would sleep on the floor, and I would sleep in the bedroom because I liked the bedroom. And one thing I remember about the bedroom is that it had a water pipe in it, and the beams were exposed, so you could see the beams that were holding up the next floor. But the water pipe came from the bathroom that was directly above, and so every time somebody flushed the toilet, you'd hear the water going through the pipe. It was exposed, and the electricity was in wires that was covered, like with the pipe, and but they just ran along the wall. And one thing I liked about that room was that the bed was comfortable. I used to always get sick every time I slept in the bed, but it was comfortable. The reason I got sick was because it was dusty, because my grandfather didn't use the cabin year-round, and dust would build up. And when he did go up there, he didn't go up there to clean. He'd go up there to, have fun and relax. And so those sheets were a lot of times dusty, and so I would always get really bad allergies and be sneezing a lot. But the bed was comfortable, and I would sleep well at night. It would be cool, mountains, cool mountains. And then in the morning I would wake up, and we'd have that cool mountain air, fresh. and you look out the windows of the bedroom and see the mountains. You'd see where can't remember if it was Linville Country Club or Blue Ridge Country Club, but you could look down in the valley and see the golf course that was down there. You could kind of see the area where Linville Caverns is. You could see the highway running down, but the best part was being able to see the mountains. And we used to go out on the deck. There was a deck on that level, the second level. I'll call it the second level of the cabin, and it wrapped around the front and then one of the sides. And the thing about it was that you could walk all around, and we also had a couple of swings up there that you could sit on and swing, and that was a good place to hang out. You come outside and eat a snack and swing on the swing and just enjoy the being outdoors. And you could stand there and look out and see the mountains. But also one thing we did from that deck was when we got a little older, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, I got a slingshot. So we used to, find a target in the yard and shoot at it with the slingshot, or just shoot it up in the air just for the heck of it. And then when my brother got older, I think he was 6th or 7th grade, he got a BB rifle. And so he used to shoot cans or cups that we throw out into the driveway. And even before that, I mean, if I went up there with my grandfather, he would bring a BB gun, and we would use the BB gun to shoot cans and rocks and stuff, or cans and cups. But yeah, we could do that there because there was plenty of room. You weren't going to hit anybody's house or anybody's car or anybody, and nobody was going to see you, so nobody was going to call the police. One thing that I didn't mention about the kitchen was that if you go out that sliding glass door that I mentioned and you go to the back of the house, there was an outdoor shower. And we actually used it a couple of times. But you could take a shower outside, naked, and nobody would ever know because there was nobody around. There were people, within walking distance, but they couldn't see you. And there was trees everywhere, and so that blocked the view. But we'd go out there and take a shower every once in a while. And I'm not sure actually why he built that shower outside, but he did. And we thought it was hilarious. We thought it was funny. We'd never seen that before. But we used it a couple times. That was a different experience for all of us. But yeah, if you go up from where the bedroom was that I mentioned, you have to take a few steps up, and then there's a landing, and then you have to take a left and go up some more. There was a big landing up there that had a card table that we used to all play cards at. Me, my brother, and my sister. Even though we were little, we would play cards and pretend like we were gambling, like my granddad did and all them. And I think we played like 21 a lot. Maybe some other games, but I don't really remember them. I remember mostly playing 21. But then on that same level, the third level, was a bedroom, and that's the bedroom that the adult, whoever was the oldest adult, that's where he or she stayed. And my granddad, it was his room, but he wasn't always there. He let other people go. But the thing about that room is it had a window that looked out over the living room, because you remember I said there was a big open space, so he could look down into the living room, and he could also look out through that window to through the other windows that were on the outside of the cabin, so he could see the mountains from his room. And so there was a bed in there. Obviously, there was like some little areas to to save or to put his clothes and stuff, but not a lot in there. He had like a photo of his airplane that he used to have. He had a few other things that, like a guitar, a little statue of an eagle, a little chest that he put like what do you call these, covers in, and linens and pillows and different stuff. He put them in there, and there was a little TV in there. But the thing about the TV was that there was no cable, and it's in the middle of the mountains, in the middle of nowhere, so it didn't pick up very many channels. The only channel it got that I remember was this channel out of Greenville, Spartanburg, South Carolina. And so my dad, when he was up there, he would use it to watch the weather, because my dad liked to know about the weather. So he would watch the weather on that, but it wasn't really good for anything else. You couldn't see very many shows or games or anything. So it just didn't get very good reception. But it was there. Then right outside of that room was a deck, and it was a smaller deck. It didn't wrap all the way around the house, but it covered the front of the third story of the deck, or of the cabin. And so there were two swings on that level, one on each side, and we used to go out there a lot. When our family went there, me, my dad, my brother, and my sister, at nights, a lot of times we would go out there and sit on the swings and talk about our days and what we were going to do the next day, and just enjoy being outside and listening to the wind and looking for the owl and all that. But when I was with my grandfather, sometimes I would go up there with him. Me and him, and if anyone else came, they would sit out there with us too. But me and him would sit out there, and he would have whiskey and Coke, or scotch and water, whatever he was drinking, and I would. He called liquor cough syrup, and he said, "This is your granddaddy's cough syrup." So, but what it really was liquor, and he wasn't getting drunk, but he was just what he liked to call knocking the edge off. Just having a drink or two and relaxing. But we'd sit out there, and he would tell me great stories about his childhood, about his life, about different things that he's done, his business, his airplane, building the cabin, all these different things that I found fascinating. He told me about when he was in the Coast Guard and how he was stationed in Alameda, California, and how he was on a boat and the waves would crash over the top of the boat. He was on the Coast Guard cutter Taney, but he would tell me all these amazing stories about being out west and doing all these things, and I thought they were fascinating stories. And I remember a lot of them, but a lot of them I've forgotten, and I wish that I had written them down or recorded them somehow. I don't know how I would have done that, but I wish I would have, because I want to hear those stories again. But he liked to tell ghost stories, so he would tell these stories about that he would, I think, make up, that about someone who died in the area, or someone who worked building the house, or somehow there were ghosts around. And I never believed in ghosts. I don't believe in ghosts now. I think that's silly. But he liked to tell them, because he thought, he's a kid, and kids like ghost stories, and it's nighttime, so he would tell them. And he was a good storyteller. I didn't really like the ghost stories, but he was a good storyteller. He made the story interesting. Excuse me. He made the story interesting, and made it a really good story. So it had a good plot. But there was one interesting story. When he was building the cabin, he went to this place called Krosnor. Krosnor was like this little town that's kind of near where the cabin was. But at Krosnor, they had a youth facility there for youth, young people, teenagers who had problems at home and couldn't live there no more because of their parents were the problem, or they were the problem. And so he went to this Krosnor place, and he got some of the older kids who were leaving because they were turning 18, and he offered them jobs, helping to build the cabin. And they helped him build the cabin, and then after it was built, my grandfather moved all his stuff in there, and he would go up there on the weekends. Some of these kids climbed up the mountain, like literally walked up the mountain, and broke into the cabin, stole his stuff, even though he had done something really good for them. He had helped them, given them jobs and stuff. They broke in, stole his stuff because they knew he wasn't going to be there. And then they tried to go back down the mountain with all his stuff, and the stuff ended up just getting scattered everywhere because they dropped it. They were falling, trying to climb down the mountain. But yeah, he always had a story for everything. And one thing that me and my brother and my sister used to do was stand out on the decks and look out, and there would be birds, big birds, and for our purposes, we called them eagles, bald eagles, we said. But most likely what they were was peregrine falcons or hawks. But we liked to watch the way that they would, float through the sky and fly and everything. And a lot of times we would take walks during the day. We would walk in this neighborhood. The neighborhood was called Linville Mountain Acres, and it was developed by this man named McNutt. I forget what his first name was, but his last name was McNutt, and he came and he developed this area off of Highway 221 between Linville and Marion, North Carolina. And he created all these lots, and a lot of people built cabins on them and stuff. But we would take little walks because it was actually like a 30-minute drive to get from the bottom of the mountain to the top, because you had to drive slowly and you're going up these curvy hills, and there were one-way roads. You had to take care not to drive off the road because you're going to end up going down the mountain. But we would take walks in the neighborhood. We'd walk up that ridge that I mentioned at the very beginning, or along that ridge. And there were, I think one time, the only time that I ever remember, we met other people who lived in that area. And I actually found out later that my 4th grade teacher lived in that area or visited some time or something. I think one of our friends also did. One of the people in my 4th grade class, this girl named Lauren Yates. She's not Lauren Yates anymore. She's Lauren Winger, but she was Lauren Yates. And I think she lived up there. Her family had a cabin there or something. But one thing that me and my brother and sister would do was, from the cabin, if you go on the back side of the mountain, it was steep, but at the bottom it led to a creek. We never actually walked to the creek from the cabin because it was too far. It was too high. The cabin was too high, and the hill was just way too steep. But we would walk down a good ways, maybe let's say 50 or 100 yards, which is pretty good ways, 300 feet. We would walk down the mountain using the trees, hold on to one tree, and then reach down and grab the next tree, and then reach down and grab the next tree. Make our way down. And one time my brother, he used tape so that he wouldn't get lost on the way down and end up in the wrong place when he came back up. And then later on, my grandfather saw it and he got really mad because he taped up the trees and littered. But we would have a fun time climbing around on the mountain. And the good thing about the cabin was the location. So it was near Marion. I said it was between Marion and Linville. You could drive to Marion and get everything you needed because they had a Food Lion, they had a Walmart, they had a Hardee's, they had a lot of other stores and stuff. I didn't go to most of them, but they had all the stuff you need. At hotels, we never stayed there, but they had some. And if we needed more food, we'd just go to the Food Lion and get what we needed and drive home or drive back to the cabin. But the location was good because from the cabin, I said you have to drive 30 minutes just to get down the mountain. But once you got down the mountain, you could drive, I don't know exactly how far it was, maybe 10 minutes, and you would be on the Blue Ridge Parkway, which is one of the most beautiful and scenic highways or byways in the country. And you could ride up and down the Blue Ridge for most of it, at least part of it in North Carolina. And go to the Lynn Cove Viaduct, which is like this road, the bridge that you would see like on a postcard. It's a beautiful place. You can go to before you even get to the Blue Ridge Parkway. There's like Linville Caverns, which is these underground caverns, and I learned when I went there as a kid. I learned about stalactites and stalagmites, and the way you tell the difference is that a stalactite hangs tight to the ceiling, and a stalagmite might grow up. So the stalagmite is pointed upward, and the stalactite is pointed down. It's like a rock formation inside the cavern. And that cavern was cool because it had a creek running through it, and it had fish in there that were blind. Blind fish swimming down the creek inside the cavern. And there was a story that during the Civil War, people who didn't want to fight came and hid in that cavern. I think that was during the Civil War, pretty sure. But it's a pretty neat place. But you could also go to, like I said, Blue Ridge Parkway, not that far from Grandfather Mountain, not that far from Mount Mitchell. We would go to a bunch of other places that I don't remember them all. I know a lot of those places and I've been to them about it. I don't remember where all we went with our family. Blowing Rock, but there's like Hanging Rock and there's Sliding Rock and there's all these different rocks, parks and places that I know just because I'm from North Carolina, but I don't really have pictures or even really good memories of going to some of the places. But I generally have like vague memories, but not precise memories. But I do remember at Grandfather Mountain, they have the mile-high swinging bridge. It's not actually a mile high, but it's a mile high in altitude. But it goes from one high point to another, and there's like a little valley under it. And the bridge is an old bridge, and it kind of swings in the wind when you walk across. When we went and I was a kid, I didn't like that. So I don't think I actually made it across, but I know my mom and my brother did. But I didn't like heights, and I didn't like that kind of thing. But Mount Mitchell, they used to have this big tower. It's not there anymore, but it was a tower, and you could climb up it. It's almost like a lighthouse. You climb up. But the tower was made of stone, and it had 360-degree views of the mountains around. And the thing about Mount Mitchell is it's the highest mountain east of the Mississippi, so basically east of the Rockies, and 6,684 feet. So you're pretty high up there. And Mount Mitchell, it has beautiful trees up there, but a lot of them are black, or at least were when I remember going there, because of acid rain. But they're beautiful because, or that whole area is beautiful, just because you get a really good view of all the mountains surrounding it, and it's just cool being up that high. And the air, is very crisp, very cool, because of the elevation. And I remember going there in the springtime, like April, when there's still being snow on the ground. But one of our favorite places was a place that I know that I went to as a baby, because I have a picture of it. Was Linville Falls. So Linville Falls is on the Linville River, and the Linville River creates the Linville Gorge. And the Linville Gorge is this wilderness area where there's hiking and camping and all of that, and people probably do rafting and stuff in there. I don't know. I don't remember ever seeing people raft there, but I'm sure they do. But anyway, at Linville Falls, it's not too terribly hard for kids to hike it, because it's not that steep, and there are really good trails, and there's plenty of steps, and it's not hard. A kid can walk it. I know that because I did it when I was a kid, and my sister did it, and my brother did it. But you can walk down to where the falls are, waterfalls, and they're pretty impressive. They're not really high, but it's a big tourist attraction, and you can see a good ways down the river, especially when you're coming in, because you come in from kind of a higher point and you hike down to the river. So when you're coming in, you can look around a lot more, and you have a better vantage point. And so we would a lot of times take pictures coming in and going out, because from those high points, that's where we could get a good view, especially if you're taking a picture like of a family or a person. You can have a nice backdrop behind you, But I still remember the names of those mountains that make up the Linville Gorge, that are surrounding the Linville Gorge. There's Table Rock, there's Hawk's Bill, there's Wiseman's View, a couple others. But the interesting thing about the Linville River is that it's not really far from the cabin. Like, we used to hear water, and I know there was a creek near the cabin, because that's where the the water for the cabin came from. We had a reservoir down there, a concrete reservoir that water came into, and then it filled up, and then the water went into a pipe, and it was pumped up to the cabin. But so I know there was a creek down there, but I think the river was so close that we could hear the river too. The Linville River, which is much bigger than the creek. But yeah, that just being in that area was cool, and my grandfather would tell me about those other mountains, the ones I mentioned, Table Rock and Wiseman's View and Hawk's Bill, and I learned to recognize them So when we were driving up there on Interstate 40, before we even got there, I could identify them. I could say, oh, there's whichever mountain. Table Rock was the easiest to identify because it was flat on top. Not flat, but closer to flat. And, but yeah, getting to the mountains was the worst part because we had to drive a long way. It was a couple hours, like 3 hours, 2.5, 3, depending on which route we took and how fast we drove and what time of day it was. It was like leaving Charlotte on Friday, even back then, was terrible because Charlotte had a lot of traffic, you know. Everybody's trying to get out of town at the same time. So that slowed things down. But once we got on I-40, go to like Statesville area, take a left, get on I-40, then go towards the mountains, we would always be looking to try to see the mountains. And then eventually they would come into view, and we would be happy because we were almost there, you know. And but once we got there, we would start to see mountains that we were familiar with, and we knew we were there. But I know one time we rode up to Boone from the cabin, and probably several times, but I remember one time for sure. And then we would go a lot of times to Spruce Pine, North Carolina, which is kind of near Mount Mitchell. It's in Mitchell County. I think it's in Mitchell County. Might be in Avery County. But in Spruce Pine, our friends lived. We had friends, the Tillies. There was David and Amy, and then there was Kyle and Alyssa, and eventually another little girl named Anya came. I didn't know her very well, but I remember when she was born. I remember like the first couple of years of her life. But after that, I didn't see her very often. But we were from the time I was, 3 years old, I was friends with David, or with Kyle and Alyssa. We met at a Burger King where we were all playing in the ball pit. But yeah, so we would go visit them, and they lived not that far from the town of Spruce Pine. And a lot of times we would go to the Pizza Hut because they had a Pizza Hut in Spruce Pine. We would always go and eat there. And if you went to a Pizza Hut in the 90s and 80s, you remember they had those red cups that sometimes you see a meme about on Facebook. About, you were born in the 80s if you remember this cup, that kind of thing. But yeah, I remember we'd eat pizza there, and we'd visit their house. They had a great house. They still have it, actually. But my favorite part of their house is they had these decks that you could look out and you could see down to the valley, but also across. There was some beautiful mountains over there. And you could look down to the valley where there was still is an apple orchard. I remember going to the apple orchard one time, picking apples off the trees, but they weren't ripe yet. They weren't ready. You would bite them, and they didn't taste good. But just going there and walking around was a cool experience. But they had a basement in that house. They have a basement, and cool thing about the basement is their dad. He's an engineer, and he used to always build things. So they always had interesting things down there that he had built or was building. And upstairs they had, downstairs they also had a room that we stayed in a couple of times. The whole family stayed in. At least my mom and dad, and the kids would sleep upstairs on the floor with the other kids, with Kyle and Alyssa. But they had a lot of open space in where their kitchen and their living room was, and there was a dividing wall that kind of divided the kitchen from the living room, but you could walk all the way around the wall. And we used to listen to the Beach Boys and then run around the wall singing around the like a divider. But yeah, we would just have a lot of fun as kids. And I remember one time we made a slip and slide outside, down like a hill that was kind of behind their house. You could put plastic on it and get it wet and then slide down. That was fun. And they had this big wooden deck that was kind of like a fort, I guess. I remember climbing all over that thing, and I remember playing Power Rangers and just doing all sorts of things with them and running around. And I remember one time, I don't know how old I was, I would say 6, maybe 7, probably 6. We were out there, and I had my mom's camera. She had this 110 Kodak camera, and I was using it to take pictures, as pictures of the mountains and stuff. And I wanted to take a picture of my friend Alyssa, and I asked her, could I take a picture? And she said no. So I chased her around like all day. And finally, she said okay, and she let me take her picture. And I took her picture, and I still have it, and I have sent it to her since then. I'm sure my mom sent her a copy a long, long time ago, but I sent her one recently, like, not recently, but I don't know, 10 years ago. But it was a really great picture just because, like, she was a cute kid, you know, and she had a pretty smile, and you could just tell, like, that she was a very happy person, and the mountains were behind her and all that. It was a really cool picture. But yeah, Kyle and Alyssa and David and Amy, I'm still connected to them. I talk to them through Facebook. I still remember them all very well. One thing about them is they were really tall. Everybody in that family is like very tall. Everybody in my family was a lot shorter. We're not short, but we're shorter. And but they all grew up tall. But the best thing about them is that they're really good people. All of them are really educated, and all the kids, Anya, Alyssa, and Kyle, they all work in healthcare, so they're all doing things to help other people, which is really good. And Amy was a professor at Appalachian State, which is a university in Boone, and I think she was a instructor or teacher at a community college. I can't remember the name of it right offhand, but I know she was like a lifelong teacher. She taught English and writing and stuff. And like I said, David, he was engineer and worked at a plant. I think ran a plant. I think he was a plant manager somewhere. But I used to know the name of the plant, but I can't remember it right offhand. But they were all really good people, and it was good to have people that we knew and we liked that lived in the mountains, because then we could go and do activities as two families instead of just having my brother and sister there. You know, we have other friends, so that was cool. They had these lakes at the front of their neighborhood, and we used to go swim in those some. I think one of them actually had catfish in it. We didn't swim in that one, but we swam in the other one, if I remember right. But I know that, not while I was there, but when my mom and brother and sister went to the cabin a few times and stayed for weeks in the summer, Kyle and Alyssa came and stayed with them. And my mom, I remember her telling me, it's been a long time ago now, 20 some years ago, but my mom was telling me how much she liked having those two kids there because they were really good people. And, you know, they didn't complain about anything, they didn't whine about anything, they didn't fuss, they didn't argue. They were just really happy kids. And I think they're still really happy, good adults. So that's good. But we enjoyed being out there with them. One thing I didn't mention about the cabin was that nearby the cabin is where the man who developed that area, I told you his name was McNutt, he had a cabin of his own. And the thing about his cabin was, in order to get to the reservoir that was on the creek that I told you about, you had to go to his house, because there was a trail from his house to the reservoir. And so every time that we'd have a water issue, me and my grandfather would have to get in the truck, drive around the mountain a little bit, get to his house, then hike down to the creek and figure out what was the problem with the reservoir. And one time, the pipe that was at the bottom of it, it had a cap on it, and the cap came off, which meant that all the water was going to leave the reservoir and go out that pipe and just go right back into the river. So that wasn't good. But we took a stick and shoved it in there real good, and we got the reservoir to fill back up until we could get a cap to replace a pipe cap to replace that. But we had to. One time when we didn't have water, we had to go meet this guy that my grandfather knew. I forget this man's name. I used to know it, but I forget it. But this man, he lived way back in a hollow, and he lived in this trailer or house. I think it was a trailer, but it was old and it was run down, and it had like moss growing on it, and they had the washer and dryer on the front porch, and there was broken down cars in the yard, and there was shit everywhere. There was like all kind of junk everywhere. And when me and my grandfather pulled up, my grandfather said, "Don't say shit to them. Don't put them down. Don't make fun of them. Don't ask them why you have cars in your yard. Don't do none of that." And I didn't. And my grandfather, he went to the guy, and he said, "Hey, Bill, how you doing?" Bill was my grandfather, Bill Brown. And the man, he gave us water. He filled up these water jugs that we had so that me and my grandfather would have water at the cabin. But the man was really nice. And, the man didn't have teeth, and he wasn't very well taken care of. He was kind of unkempt and long hair, and he was just the hillbilly mountain guy. But he was nice, and he treated my grandfather with respect, and he was generous, and he was a nice person. But one thing I learned from that experience, and what my grandfather told me about don't say shit, was to treat all people with respect, even if they come from a different place from you, even if they have less than you, or even if they live differently than you. You're not better than anyone. Just treat them with respect, get along with them, and then go on with your life. And that's what we did. But one of the coolest things about that whole area that McNutt developed was the area close to where he lived. There was a waterfall, and I actually just learned the name of the waterfall when I was a kid. It didn't have a name. We didn't know the name if it did have a name. But it's called Oconee Falls. And I found it on the map, and I had pictures of it when I was a kid, me standing in front of it and me playing in the water, this little pool that was under it. But the waterfall, I don't know exactly how tall it was. Let's say it's 50 feet tall. And it always had plenty of water coming down, and at the bottom, like I said, there was like a pool. It's probably 3-4 feet deep, maybe. But we would go swim in that and just watch as the water came down, And it was cold water, even in the summertime. But you could look from being inside that pool and look down, and you would see this bridge that went over the river or went over the falls. Because I think there was some smaller rapids or smaller falls. But the river would go under the bridge and then down the mountain. But you could see the bridge and then the mountains behind them on the other side of 221. And I remember drawing that scene when I was a kid many times. I would be sitting in my class in Indian Trail, North Carolina, Sun Valley, or Shiloh, and just draw the pictures of the mountains with that bridge and, you know, a truck going across it or something. That was a stone bridge, stone on each side, and then it had, I think, it was a wooden bridge going across. But yeah, that was a special place in my memory. And the cool thing about that is that once I found out the name of it not too long ago, I ended up looking for pictures and videos of it online, and I found a video that someone posted, someone whose parents had a lot up there, and the guy took a video, and they posted it to YouTube, so I was able to see the waterfall again, which I thought was really cool, because the thing about that waterfall is you can't get to it unless you live in that neighborhood, and you have to have a code to get in the gate. It's not a big gate, it's just like one of those arms, you know. But you have to have a code in order to get there, and you're not supposed to go there unless you live there. And so I thought, well, never going to get to see it again, but I did get to because of YouTube. So that was cool. And I'll tell you, one time that me and my grandfather, we were going to the other side of the mountain where the waterfall and where the developer McNutt lived, and where you had to go to his house to get to the creek where the reservoir was. One time we were going to fix the reservoir, see what was wrong, and my grandfather couldn't get in the gate. And the reason he couldn't get in the gate is because they changed the code and they didn't tell him, because he didn't live back there, but he had to go back there in order to get to his reservoir. But someone just forgot to tell him, and so he didn't know the gate code. So one time we followed someone in, and so we didn't need the gate code. But another time we couldn't get in, and so he had a metal toolbox, a small metal toolbox, in the back of his truck, and he told me, hey, get that metal toolbox and run it around the gate and put it on the other side of the gate and make the motion sensor think a car is there, and it'll lift the gate and I can drive through. So that's what I did, and that's what we did, and we got in. But another time that wouldn't work. It didn't work. And the gate didn't come up. So my grandfather walks up to the gate. Like I said, it was just an arm, like a wooden arm. He ripped it off, threw it in the woods, and then we drove up in there. But he's like, don't ever tell a goddamn person about this. So I'm telling YouTube, I'm telling the whole world. But he's been dead for a long time. He'll be all right. He'll get over it. But it was funny when he did it, just because of like how mad he got that he couldn't get in and all that. But yeah, we had a gate on this part of the land where we lived, but or where the cabin was, but we never had a problem getting in there. And even if we did, we would have just followed someone else. I know that a couple times after the cabin was sold in 1999, like my dad and mom just went just to see what the cabin was like, looked like, if it was still there, if it had changed, and they got in just by following it in another car. But now they have like cameras and all kinds of stuff, so you can't do that anymore, or you shouldn't, because you might get caught. But yeah, it was a sad thing in 1999 when what happened was my uncle, who took over the tile business from my grandfather, wanted to sell it because my uncle owed the IRS a lot of money, and he needed to find out how to get it. So he started selling things that he took over from my grandfather, because basically when my uncle took over the tile company, my grandfather didn't have a way to pay bills anymore because all of his income went to my uncle. because my uncle kind of cut my grandfather out. And after my uncle cut my grandfather out, he just bought all my grandfather's stuff. So he bought the airplane, he bought the cabin, he bought this land that my grandfather had. Just whatever my grandfather had, he bought it from. He bought the house or the condo that we lived in 1990 that made us have to move. But yeah, so he took over all those things. But in 1999, he needed to sell them because he had to pay the tax man, and he was in big trouble because he hadn't been paying all of his taxes. He had, I don't know what the number is. I think it was 100,000. It could have been 200,000, but the number I remember hearing from my uncle was 100,000. But he had to get that money, so he sold the cabin, and they sold it 14 acres in all. He had 7 acres where the cabin was, and then 7 acres across the way. So 14 acres in all, and a cabin that was 3 stories tall. Sold it for $70,000. And I wonder in today's real estate market, like that would probably be an $800,000 house, cabin. And it didn't even have all the creature comforts that people like heating and air and all that. But you could live there. And I think people would have paid a lot of money for it now. A ridiculous amount of money, especially after the people who bought it fixed it and made it more modern, comfortable. Because it was meant to just be a cabin. It wasn't meant to be like a luxurious estate. But a lot of the people who live up there now, they have really fancy homes. So maybe somebody changed it, but I don't even think the cabin is there anymore. I think someone knocked it down and replaced it. But if they didn't, then it and it's still there, it's probably worth a lot of money. But some other memories I have of the mountains, and I'll get through these real quick. I was in 7th grade, I think, or 6th grade, and our class went to the Biltmore Estate. Our whole grade actually went to the Biltmore Estate, and each class I think went in a separate bus, if I remember right. And we rode up there, and if you've ever been to the Biltmore Estate, you know how enormous that house is, and how beautiful the area around it is. And if you've ever seen that movie Richard Rich, you know the Biltmore Estate because that's the house that they said that he lived in. But there's no McDonald's in there, But there is a bowling lane, I think, and there's a pool, and there's all kinds of stuff. It's just this big, old, beautiful house built by Cornelius Vanderbilt in the late 1890s. But it was at one time the largest private home in the United States. But I just remember going up there with my class, and I remember going on this tour, and the tour guides not liking me because I asked them questions that they didn't know the answers to, and I would just have side conversations with people in my classes. And we annoyed them by getting too close to things that they didn't want us to touch. I don't think we actually touched anything we weren't supposed to touch, but they were just like, hey, pay attention, stop talking, listen to us, But that was a beautiful house, and I was impressed by the tile, because it has tile in the house, and I told you my family has always done tile since the 50s, and the tile in that house is over 100 years old, 120 some years old now. It's still there. It doesn't have an issue. So that's pretty impressive. Whoever did that right. Yeah, I enjoyed going around, or having that chance to go on that field trip to the mountains, because that was a beautiful place. And yeah, I'll probably do another video about the mountains, because I have other memories, but I'll talk about them in a separate video. But the mountains has always been a special place to me, just because that's where we went. When we went on vacation when I was a kid, sometimes we'd go to the beach, but most of the time the mountains, because we had a place to live. We had a place to stay. We had a cabin there that my grandfather owned. And we liked it there. We were happy there. It was beautiful there. And it was near some of our friends, you know. So it was just a great place to go. I wish I could go there again. And hopefully I will get to. I'm going to North Carolina at the end of this month and part of November 2023. So hopefully I'll get a chance to go up there, see the mountains again. But if not, you know, I hope that when I die, they cremate me and they take the ashes and they, you know, put them in the Linville River. They walk down to the Linville Falls, pour my ashes into the river, and then let my ashes float on down. So that way I'll always be there for as long as my ashes exist. Yeah, I just I want to go back, and I need to go back, and I think it'll make my life better if I get a chance to go to those mountains again. Just being there will make my life better. So, thank you for listening to 106 minutes of me talking about my mountain memories.